Good morning or afternoon or whatever time it is where you are. I'm Nahila Bonfiglio.
And I'm Carly Jordan.
And we want to talk about women in sports.
You know, I think both of us were really inspired by this topic just because we both were or still are female athletes, and I think we both played two very different sports growing up. I did a lot of softball and now I play Quidditch, which is a contact sport. And I feel like both of those are often criticized as being more masculine sports in a sense.
Absolutely. Whereas for me, I played volleyball and I played basketball and I also did dance, but I was terrible at all of them. And I didn't have nearly so many issues to deal with on the feminine versus masculine point because I went to such a small school that they just needed any kind of athlete.
And I feel like nowadays it's still kind of that same thing like it was when you were 6 years old and you're playing on a co-ed soccer team with your friends and you wouldn't get the ball past you. Sometimes I love my teammates and stuff, but there's even still times now where I'm a 21-year-old and I will be wide open and someone won't pass the ball to me and will make a little comment afterwards about how I wouldn't be able to score, and so instead they'll drive through 3 defenders just so they can be the one to do it. And so I don't know, I feel that got us thinking about how female athletes in college and even outside past college get depicted by the mainstream media.
And this is something that I feel most people can see an answer to pretty easily. I mean, we all know how female athletes are generally portrayed by the media, but we wanted to know why and if there was something that could be done to make it so that people out there saw female athletes as athletes and not as sex symbols. We didn't have any answers to these questions ourselves, and so we looked up a couple of experts. The first woman we spoke to was Tracy Everbach.
And she's a journalism professor at UNT, correct?
Yes, and she covers women in the media and particularly in sports. So she had a really good knowledge base on this, and we asked her a couple questions about how women are portrayed versus men, and about why that is and how it might be able to be changed in the future.
Sports is probably the most male-dominated area. It's still only about 10% of the employees in sports sections and sports departments across the country are made up of women. The profession is not friendly to women in the first place. You have a mentality there among a lot of men that I know what's important, I know what sports is, this is what our audience wants. Our audience doesn't care about women's sports. Our audience only cares about men's sports. I do think that if there was an effort to get more women in there and to promote more women, that more women would choose to do it, or more women would stay in the business.
This next segment that I want to do, I found online a bunch of really weird and sexist sports comments that people had made about female athletes over the years. And it kind of got me thinking that, if there were more female journalists out there, that a lot of these comments, probably wouldn't happen, or at least there would be more, outcry. That made me want to play a little game where I'm going to ask you a few quotes, and I want you to guess, kind of what time period they're from. Let's see, I have one that's from before 1950, one from between the 50s and the 90s, and one that's post-90s.
Perfect.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Women play about 25% as good as men, so they should get about 25% of the money that men get.
I'm going to say that one's between... I'm going to say that's between 1950 and 1990s.
You got it. That was in 1973. Bobby Riggs said that about Billie Jean King. Before their Battle of the Sexes match. Exactly, which I'm sure that came back to bite him in the butt. He even came back later and said that he threw the game and that the only reason she won was because she was in her prime, whereas he was 55 years old. At least, hopefully I feel like we might have progressed a little bit past that point, you would
Hopefully,
hope.
yes.
Okay, here's another one. It's ladies' business to look beautiful, and there's hardly any sports in which she seems able to do it.
I'm hoping that one is from pre-1950s.
You would be right. I feel like this whole studio would have exploded if that quote had been from post-90s.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I didn't actually find a whole lot of info on this, only it was written in 1936. It was written by Sports Illustrated, which I feel was lots of people read Sports Illustrated today and still did then, and that kind of like perpetuates this idea that like women shouldn't even be in sports like from an early time.
Absolutely. I think Sports Illustrated is one of the top sports magazines, which means that people are getting their information about sports and different athletes from it, which means that they're going to believe what they're pumping out.
Exactly. So this one's actually one of my favorites. It's not really a quote, it's just that the women were asked to twirl in their outfits during the Australian Open.
Well, I know because I got the other two right that one must be post-1990.
You were correct, however sad that is that it was post-1990. Oh, yeah, and not only that, it was Serena Williams is who they asked to twirl in their skirt, the number one singles tennis player in the world to twirl.
Wow. And what year was that?
That was in 2015.
Oh, my God. That's something that Tracy Everbach said. She talked about the fact that men and consumers in general are more comfortable with women when they're playing, quote, feminine sports.
Often the more popular sports for women are the more ones that are seen as more girly or feminine, such as ice skating or gymnastics, rather than basketball or hockey.
Neither of us have pursued what would be considered a feminine sport into college. I think Quidditch is pretty much any gender ever. And you go across ages as well, as far as I know, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's mostly like 18 to 22-year-olds, but yeah, it does go up a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the most feminine considered sports at a college level is cheerleading, as far as we could think of.
Yeah, I would say that.
So we tracked down a UT cheerleader named
Macy Lindhart. Technically, she said that she had to be called an ex-UT cheerleader.
Answering kind of as a like former, I have to call myself former UT cheerleader now. Whenever we first come into the program, they tell us that they don't consider cheerleading a sport at UT. We're considered student athletes. And I don't think it's like, no, we don't think y'all are a sport. I think it's just we're not seen as a sport by the athletic department. It's nothing personal. It's just not how the program is run. I've never had anyone like in the media really even talk directly to us.
We all have those biases. We all think of one thing as not being as worth our time as other things, but we need to respect that the people who are putting the time into that, it matters to them. And just because it doesn't seem as legitimate to us doesn't give us the right to discredit it. So I think we should look forward a little bit and think about what we as journalists and as women can do to try and improve this landscape for future female athletes and teams. I mean, I know one thing is media representation. If we had more women reporting on sports, and particularly on female teams and female athletes, then we would have a better connection to the audience and more representation. And that's just, data shows that representation improves when there are more of that same demographic within the media.
One of the journalists that we talked to, Jessica Luther, and she has her own podcast called Burn It All Down, which is the feminine sports podcast you need.
You have to actively be recruiting people who can write on these things, who want to write on these things, providing them the space in order to do the kind of fan-building work that it takes in order to create the audience. Like, the audience is there. I mean, at the last Winter Olympics, for the first time ever, NBC showed more women than men in their coverage, which, if the argument is that these places chase the money of who people will watch, NBC obviously decided that in these last Olympics, they're willing to watch women, and they do it. All we see is that the more coverage women's sports get, the more people who watch it. That's how sports works. Like, fan culture is so important in order to, it perpetuates itself.
As you could tell by the portion in which we read the quotes, this is an issue that's been around for a long time. And though it has certainly gotten better, it is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. So we hope that through some of the questions that we asked, we have seen a slightly better path towards eliminating the high degree of sexism in athletics and allowing female athletes to reach the same levels as male athletes and the same level of respect among viewers and fans.
Absolutely, Nahila. I think that's about all the time we've got here. So thank you guys all for listening. Once again, I'm Carly Jordan.
And I'm Nahila Bonfiglio. Have a great day.